We're back with our three super religious educators who are giving us all of their great advice and wisdom for bringing youth to GA. And our next topic is sponsors, adult sponsors of youth. Why do we need them and what's their role at GA? Does anybody have anything they'd like to talk about in terms of why we need sponsors?
So many things that I
All
want
right,
to
I'll get it started.
Other people.
I'll get it started. The reason why we require every youth to have a sponsor at GA is because the UUA does not provide supervision for youth while at GA. Supervision needs to be done by preferably someone who they know. It's someone who is 25 years old or older, and the sponsor signs on for a certain set of responsibilities. They are signing on to be the adult of record for the entirety of GA, who is responsible for the youth in case of emergency or any type of medical situation, or just in terms of basic supervision and being an adult touchstone.
Yeah, being a sponsor is funny. It's actually one of my favorite things. It does mean some sacrifices, which I don't know. I don't think of them as sacrifices, but to a lot of people, and especially religious professionals, they are. I mean, it means no consuming alcohol while at GA, which for some people is a big deal. But it means really being, the adult who's looking out for your youth at GA. And it can be such an incredible experience and a chance for youth to get to kind of stretch their wings a little bit, experience a little bit of autonomy and responsibility while still having someone really holding that container for them. And, letting them know where the boundaries are and making sure that there are in fact boundaries, both physical location boundaries as well as, behavioral ones and emotional ones. But really being there to help guide them through what can be such an incredible experience, because it's not, like Deborah said, it's not a con. It's not a camp. Youth have lots of choices at GA. They can choose what to do with their time. And so having a sponsor who's someone to check in with them throughout the day, make sure they've eaten. GA is a marathon. And while there's like sort of a break in the middle of the day when most people get lunch, there's no official like meals the way there are at cons or camps or anything like that. There's nobody telling them, okay, now it's time to go eat. Now it's time to take a snack. Now it's time to do this. And so, checking in with them, having meals together, sitting down, having that fellowship and building those multi-generational relationships is just so key in supporting our youth so that they can, stretch those wings, but know that they're supported. And that if something were to happen, that they have an adult that they trust, that they can turn to, who will be there for them. And even if the thing that happens is just that they get really overwhelmed, or they have a meltdown, because it'll probably happen around Friday. And so having sponsors that know their youth is so huge. There's so much more to say, but I want Mary and Scott to say things.
To piggyback off what Jessica just shared, you're providing them with the opportunity to have freedom. And I feel like it's also really important that you as the adult sponsor are setting at least some parameters of structure around the trip. This is what we're going to do. This is when we're going to meet up. This is a time where everyone's going to come together. And this is a time of 4 or 5 hours where you're on your own, and I trust you to make good choices. A piece I would lift up that I feel is really important when considering who your sponsors are going to be is, as Jessica, you alluded to it, you're there to care for the emotional and spiritual support of the youth, particularly if there's a meltdown or other challenges arise, but making sure that adults who serve as sponsors are emotionally healthy and in a good place to be caring for other people. And to me, that starts with being able to care for yourself first.
It's really important for that adult to have some sort of a relationship and some sort of understanding of who that youth is. And sometimes that adult might be in a parent role. It may be, a youth advisor. It could be the religious educator. But they need to be prepared. The sponsor needs to be prepared that GA may be a little bit different as a sponsor because you do have that different level of connection and responsibility. That being said, it can also be so rewarding. I find it very rewarding to be a youth sponsor at General Assembly. There are sacrifices that have to be made. You can't have a glass of wine with dinner, and that's okay. So it's I don't look at it as a sacrifice. It's more of an opportunity. And every adult who has done it with us has just been really pleased afterwards of what their experience was, because it enriches the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say one of the things that has proven invaluable to us is the pre-GA parent-sponsor youth meeting. And I always use the agreement, sponsor youth parent agreement form that the YAYA office puts out as a template, and then we modify it as needed, for our group and our situation. But it talks about addressing things that you might not think about, that you may think are a given. But I find that having that conversation and really spelling things out and making sure that the parent, the youth, and the sponsor are all on the same page is really, really helpful. And it really makes a huge difference in everyone's experience of the trip. And it covers, everything from expectations. What does the youth expect of their sponsor? What does the parent expect of the sponsor, and what does the sponsor expect of the youth in terms of participation, in terms of communication, but even things like self-care. Youth are really great at being like, yeah, of course, I'll eat, I'll shower, whatever. But what's funny is that if you actually, I have gotten to the point where we articulate, okay, how many full meals will you agree to have every day, plus snacks? Oh, well, I'll make time for 2 meals and 3 snacks. Okay, fine. But the 2 meals have to include vegetables. It's that kind of stuff. And we will shower every day. We will be asleep by, there's a curfew for being in the lodging, whether it's hotel room or house or whatever it is. But then it's also how many hours of sleep do you commit to getting every night? And so really basic things like that, but it makes it so much easier to then, when you're in the trip and having those conversations, and if a youth doesn't seem like they're taking care of themselves very well, and asking have you eaten today? Have you had that, when was the last time you had a snack? How many hours of sleep did you get last night? And it's a way to reaffirm those self-care things, and without having to feel like it's coming out of the blue or you're being super overbearing. It's like, hey, we had an agreement. How'd that 5 hours of sleep treat you? Well, I only thought 3.5. Oh, maybe that's why you're tired. How about we go for 6 tonight instead of 5? There can be a conversation in that way because you've opened it up ahead of time. And I think that those things are so huge.
Actually, the UUA staff, GA is a very overwhelming experience for just about everyone. And we tend to buddy up with each other and just check in every day and say, have you eaten lunch yet? Can I run and bring you something? Can I spell you here so you can run back to the hotel and get it in a quick nap or a quick shower? It's really a good idea to have your sponsors have somebody too who they can connect with to keep that element of supervision going.
Well, and the sponsors who go develop a bond with each other over this work, especially if they're in my situation where we all share one living environment, all share a house. So the sponsors, usually we room together and we build our own relationship in addition to the relationship and supporting the youth at General Assembly. And it can be, like I said, really rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. Was that last year? No, 2 years ago, New Orleans. I last minute couldn't go, and we ended up with a parent taking the place and sponsoring some of our youth, and our other sponsor, who was one of our youth advisors, who was going on the trip. Like they sort of knew each other tangentially. You know, one was a parent of a youth, one was a youth advisor. And by the end of that trip, because they ended up rooming together, they, you know, had super bonded and have since now it's, you know, almost 2 years later and they're like best friends and have this great bond, you know, out of going on this trip together as adults.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, this isn't just for youth. We do it for the youth, but we get stuff out of it too.
To piggyback on your point, Jessica, I would agree. We do it for the youth. And I would encourage people considering sponsorship to establish that as one of your main expectations going into the GA experience, that you're there primarily for the youth. And know that at any point throughout the week, no matter how many cool workshops you may have planned to attend for yourself personally or whatnot, that things can come up and often do at a moment's notice that will necessitate your attention. Planning for that and being aware of that proactively, I think, is really important.
Yeah, which just makes me think that like flexibility is one of the biggest, you know, along with responsibility and care for youth, but the ability to be flexible is such a key attribute of an effective GA sponsor, because it will allow them to ebb and flow with what the week brings, instead of getting locked into a particular idea of what it's going to look like. Because the reality is nothing ever goes 100% according to plan when you're on these trips. And so being able to have that flexibility and adapt to changes on the fly is just, that's huge. And so maybe when you're looking for sponsors, someone that you know can, you know, roll with the punches, go with the flow, adapt as needed, you know, while maintaining safety and everything else is a key piece.
The maximum number of youth that each adult can sponsor is 3. It's a pretty low ratio, especially when you're looking at, you know, and being there for an entire week and, you know, the hotel rates and travel. Can the religious educator or the youth group coordinator be a sponsor? Is that something you'd recommend?
I do.
I do as well.
I do, and I would recommend it as long as that individual likes being around high school youth.
Right.
And I do not feel that that should be assumed.
Agreed.
Have you ever had trouble finding sponsors? How do you go about thrashing the bushes to come up with adults who are willing to go on this trip to GA and be a sponsor?
I build the cost of my sponsor's trip into my larger trip budget. And that cost is then amortized out amongst all of the youth, because my opinion is that the youth can't go unless they have adults to sponsor them. And so it should not be a financial hardship for my adults to be able to sponsor youth on this trip, because I think my adults are giving up a lot to do that. So for me, it's not super hard actually to find adults who, you know, meet my basic criteria of wanting to be with youth and being good with youth and all of those things, but they get a free trip to GA. And so that for me is a big selling point with my adults. And so far, with the exception of the emergency year, all of our sponsors have been existing youth advisors from our youth group. So they know our group and they have that rapport already.
Yeah, I've done the same thing where, again, I try to cover as much cost as possible for the adults going. And like Jessica said, it's part of the expense that we all have to, because parents need sponsors to go with their youth. Having them be part of the youth group is really powerful. It's important for them to be able to connect. That being said, I did have one year where one of my sponsors was also a GA volunteer, and that made it more challenging. So having them be either a GA volunteer or if they're a delegate for the congregation, you need to make sure that you plan accordingly for some coverage during those times when they may not be available. So that's a consideration. My preference is not to have my sponsors be a volunteer.
Yeah.
I've had real good luck with parents of youth that have been really good co-sponsors with my group. And I found that they have they automatically have an investment in it since their youth are interested in going and participating. And I've worked as hard as we can to make sure that as much of their expenses are covered as possible. I think most years we've been able to, at minimum, get their registration covered, and some years a little more than that.
Yeah, and adults can apply for scholarships too. We have our adult sponsors apply for scholarships, absolutely, and a lot of times they receive them, and so that helps with with the cost, and especially because adult registration is a lot more than youth registration.
It is. It is.
So that helps a lot. And to Mary's point, we'll often have, because we often have youth who are delegates, and so we'll have if we have adult sponsors who are also delegates, we'll have our delegate sponsors sponsor our delegate youth, because they're all interested in the same kind of stuff. And so
And
that
they'll be in the same places.
exactly. So that coverage issue isn't so much of a thing. And I have served on GA staff as an adult. And when I've done that, I've only sponsored, I have a couple of years where I was on staff and I had a youth on staff. So I sponsored that youth who was on staff, but I didn't sponsor other youth because I knew that I just would not be available with my schedule. So trying to match those kinds of things, I think to Mary's point, is really, really invaluable.
Oh, this is all great information. The situation of having adult sponsors for youth is can be a new one, an unusual one for people who haven't been to GA before with youth. It doesn't really mirror any other youth group situations we find. So it's really great to have this information so that people can understand the process, what it takes and what they can get out of it, and how to find the best people for it. Thank you so much.